Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. It's your host, Simon MacInnis of the Journey Faith podcast. And yes, you guessed it, we are back for another exciting episode of the podcast. And this week, it gives me great pleasure to welcome a great friend of mine, Jake Prosper. Welcome, Jake.
Hello there.
Welcome to the podcast. Jake, we know each other from Promise Keepers, which is now Impactus. We've known each other for about 3 years now. You and I have served on the advisory board, and now you are currently uh, the chair of the nominating committee, which I've had the awesome pleasure of being on for the last 3 years since I joined the advisory board, and looking forward to continued ministry. And
Great.
Jake, I want to thank you for your friendship and your mentorship and your leadership, most of all, with Impactus and imparting your wisdom into my life. And we've had a number of discussions over the last year about ministry as a whole. And then we got into the topic of having you as a guest on the podcast. So, Jake, I want to thank you from the deepest part of my heart for taking some time out of your schedule. I know you've got a very busy schedule between your regular work and Impactus, but thank you so much for sitting down with us for a few moments here at the Journey of Faith and sharing your story. So
Well,
why don't you give
thanks,
us a little
Simon.
why don't you give us a little intro, other than what I've already covered, to who Jake Prosper is and what you do?
Whoa. Who I am, and we share this, Simon, and so much appreciate that, is we're a child of God, right? We're sons of God. And in that context, there has been so many ministry opportunities. When you said my regular job, that's kind of yeah, raises a few things for me because my career job was about 15 years ago in engineering management. But then the company did me a favor to release me to then carry on what God wanted me to do. And so since then, I have been taking seminary courses. I've been involved in driving clients to hospital appointments, which is a ministry opportunity, really is. Phenomenal
Yes.
opportunities there. And involved with men's groups, involved with our local, my hometown is Brockville. And we have a network of churches that get together and organize men's events. Like we're just coming up to a men's breakfast right now, and in a couple of weeks. And we have someone as a psychologist, a therapist, coming to speak
Oh
on that
wow.
on empathy. Can you believe it? Guys
Oh,
empathizing with other guys, like, hey, this is pretty heavy stuff, right?
oh my gosh. Yes, I can only imagine what that room is going to be like. There's going to
So,
be lots of feelings thrown around with the
oh
guys.
yeah, yeah, we're not touchy-feely guys, are we?
Yes.
Are we? But you know what? What is so important, and actually you were referencing this, Simon, is that, over the last 3 years, as we got to know each other, it is that relationship building that is so huge, right?
Yes.
And lets us uh start to unburden ourselves a bit of some of those things that we really need to unburden, and and have someone come alongside. And that is so, you know on every level, emotionally, spiritually, on every level, that is so important. And so that's where my heart is, and that's, so I'm engaging in whatever ways I can find.
Right, yes. And I'm sure that the people that you minister to through the hospice visits and the
Yep.
different encounters that you have, not
Mhm.
only do you minister to them, but them
Oh,
telling you their story. Just
yes.
I can only imagine what kind of a blessing that brings to you, and what kind of ministry that does for you, and how it encourages your heart with
Yes.
um, the
Exactly.
struggles of the human being,
Yes.
and the struggles, and how you can offer hope to them through what you've
Exactly.
seen through your
Yep.
life. Not saying that we know the struggles that these people go through, but we can offer them a sense of hope and a sense of encouragement and ministry and say, hey, I don't understand fully what you're going through, but let me pray for you.
Yeah.
And then you build on that relationship, because I'm sure there are times where you've had certain people that have you've driven them multiple times to different appointments.
Yes.
And so you
Correct.
built on that relationship with them.
Exactly.
It's the same thing that you and I have done over these last 3 years through the ministry of Promise Keepers and now Impactus and all that,
Mhm.
and
That's right.
continued on. So
Yep.
let's just jump right into our topic today and look at your story, your journey, and
Right.
what's your earliest memory or recollection of your faith journey? Was it growing up in a Christian home? Maybe grandmother took you to church,
Yep.
grandfather, whatever. You went to Sunday school. What's the earliest thoughts that you have on your journey?
Well, yes. My parents were immigrants from Holland after the Second World War, and they brought with them the very strong Christian Reformed faith. And they really sought to live into that. And, for immigrants, it's pretty difficult life. And it was for them. Thankfully for us as kids, as we came along, and I was born here, uh, we had that a good loving environment, but very much it was church based, like Sundays. It was twice to church on Sunday, Sunday school. And so I was brought up very much in a church environment. But as is too typical, during my teenage years, I started to question and then rebel. And
Right,
uh, yeah, I walked away from I'll say my parents' church. I had always an inkling that there was a God, a
right,
sense that there was a God in my heart, but I struggled with the reality of how does that play out in people, because I saw people in church being just as difficult and sometimes, not that nice.
right,
And so I didn't fully understand how God works in and through broken people. I didn't really understand it.
right,
So it was actually later in my late 30s that my father actually passed away from lung cancer, smoked all his life pretty well. And yeah, I had that struggle, which again is not not uncommon, of father figure, human father figure, and godfather figure. And with my father's passing, that disconnected.
right,
And now was, okay, God, where are you? Who are you? And I started actually, where do you go to find God? And I started going to different churches. And it was interesting, Simon, that I had a sense of what I was looking for, like a presence of God. And in some churches, there was no presence of God. I have to, just, I had no sense of it.
right,
A fellow that I went to work with, was working with, actually said, "Well, I understand you're looking around. You might want to come over to my church and just try it out, just see what you think." And I walked into that church, and it was like, oh, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was the guy sitting in the last row of seats, tears coming down my
right,
face from the worship songs, and the message just striking me in the heart. It was so relevant and so like real that it was like, wow, this is what I'm looking for. This was it. This is it. And I had a sense also, and this is the other cool part, um, of people really caring. And this was guys seeing me come in the door, recognizing that I was new, and coming alongside. Start just opening up conversations, just stepping in there and just say, "Hey, what's your name? How are you doing?" Da, 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 da. And just general conversation, but just made me feel welcome.
right. And I
You know?
suppose that kind of threw you for a loop because of
Yeah.
the previous experiences that you had in church, where you
No.
said where you reflected, saying that there was times where you didn't have that connection to God and
No.
you were wondering
No.
where he was. And then,
And I didn't. There were other people around at those churches that really didn't try to reach out to me.
right,
So it was a combination of both, right? And we see that so often is, guys being real with other guys, reaching out, making a difference, but being Christ, being Christ-like,
right.
right? And it really touched me. And this is now, more than 30 years ago. But yes, I'm starting to be an old guy, but it was like middle age, and at the time, and yeah, it made a real difference. That was the beginning, and then another fellow invited me to a small group, men's small group.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Talk about real conversations. It was awesome. Awesome.
So I guess even though you stepped away from the faith of your parent, well, not so much the faith of your parents, the church, the
Right.
church building as a whole, you stepped
Right.
away
I
from.
stepped away from that church building and that church community.
Right.
I found Christ in another community.
In a different setting. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so basically your foundation in the faith was through the Dutch Reformed Church
Right.
and through your parents, but
Mhm.
then you took some time away to evaluate what you needed to
Yeah.
essentially have in your life, and that these two chance encounters, one at this church and then one at this men's Bible study, that's when Jesus fully met you, and you're like, wow.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's
So,
a good summary, Simon.
so would there be a significant with these two individuals that one invited you to church and one
Yep.
that invited you to the Bible study? Would those be considered significant individuals in your life journey of faith?
Well,
Or is there somebody else that stands out to you that when you encountered that person, you were like, holy jumpets, this is what I need? Or is there a Bible character or a Bible verse that stands out to you, Jake, that when you encountered
yeah.
them or that verse, you were like, I need more of this and I need to delve deeper into this?
Well, and you got a couple of things there because there are Bible characters, and as I was thinking about this a little bit, uh, the King David comes to mind, right? A flawed man, but yet God says a man after his own heart and courageous and stepping out in battles. Now, we don't fight physical battles, or at least not in the Western culture, physical
Right.
battles, but we certainly fight spiritual battles.
Yeah.
And so, in some of those things, and then you read some of his Psalms of poetry, and you see the struggles and the vulnerability. For me, from a Bible character standpoint, he stands out for me all the time. It's a beautiful thing because he just exposes his heart. It's right there in the poetry, and you let that kind of work through, and it's like, okay, this is pretty real. Yeah, I can identify with his struggle right there. But certainly one of the guys that, like the fellow that invited me to that men's small group, he was significant through the next few years. And actually, when I actually ultimately got around to doing my baptism. The usual baby baptism, right?
Yeah.
No. My immersion baptism.
Right.
He was there beside me, and he still is. I will consult him sometimes on difficult interpersonal because he has phenomenal spiritual and relational wisdom that I just respect, and he is still there in my
Wow.
life, although in smaller ways now,
Yes.
and we've diverged in different ways. But and he's still there, and I still really respect him. He's an awesome, awesome man.
That's amazing to
Yeah.
see that God put such a godly person into your life
Mhm.
and kind of at an opportune time for you
Right.
where
Right.
when you were searching for
Yep.
meaning for your life, not meaning for life because you probably did have meaning for life, but you were searching for a deeper sense spiritually,
Mhm.
and God placed this gentleman in your path and totally directed it to great things to what you've
Deeper
come
things.
deeper things and what you've accomplished to today.
Mhm.
And I think of how small our circles run. That before once we met, and then we got talking, and we got conversing about spiritual things, and uh, learning more about each other. We found out how many uh, close mutual friends we have. Uh, Speaking of one that was actually a guest on my podcast way back early in the day, Dr. Eric Hallett, who
Oh,
is
yes.
the district superintendent of your area. And
Mhm.
so uh
And was and has been the pastor at my church. And in fact, I was on the board of our church when we did a pastoral search. And so I was one of them and played I played a role in bringing him to our church. I was interviewing him and
yeah.
doing reference checks and the whole bit. Yeah.
And then I can't
Oh,
forget our other friend, Reverend Stuart Marples over in Chaville,
oh
Quebec.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
and then Lena Anderson and Dean Breton, and the whole crowd from PK and Impactus, and
Mhm.
how interwoven. And
There you go.
who would have ever thought that Jesus would have brought this group of men together,
Right.
and
Right.
the experiences that we've had, and been able to uh minister and mentor, and just put so much involvement into um, just the world, and
You know,
look what we're doing.
but what's interesting, and you've got this journey of faith. One of the realities, especially early on, but it can happen still. And James likes to talk about this about uh, consider it joy, my friends, when you encounter all kinds of trials and struggles and whatever. And I've had my ups and downs too. And I've had my crisis moments, and even crisis of faith where I've struggled with, God, what are you asking of me? What? Is this really what you want me to do?
Yeah,
So I've had those moments, but they just that experience just builds faith, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
God trust is there. Trusting that God is there through those moments. It's huge. So even in these encounters that you're talking about with various people, that is certainly so important as we share each other's stories, we hear each other's stories of faith, that it grows our faith. Like you to hear mine, me to hear yours. This is all part of the journey of
Yes.
faith.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, it's hard to believe that our time is coming closely to an end. It's hard to believe.
Oh, and there was still another verse I wanted to share, Mike.
Oh
Uh,
well, we'll go right ahead. Share the other verse
okay, there was one more that I really wanted
before
to
we go
share
to the
because
end. But yes, please do share
okay,
the other verse.
okay. The Romans 8:28. If anybody's familiar with that one, it's in all things, and I put in brackets the good, the bad, the ugly. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And for any of us who are true disciples of Christ, we are called. We are loved, and he works for us, for our good. It's a beautiful verse, it's a beautiful promise. And that I have seen played out in my life and been able to encourage others in that as well. That even when there are really difficult struggles, God's working. He may be building your character, or he may be working through yours as a witness for someone else. Sometimes it's a mystery until you're out the other side and you see things in hindsight. But I just love that verse. So I
Yes.
just had to share it with you.
Excellent. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm going to circle back to
Oh,
when you talked about the Bible character that kind of significantly
David.
stands out to you, David. And I recently heard a sermon that talked about the life of David, and the fact that David stayed home from the battlefield
Oh
because
yeah.
he wanted to, and he didn't think anybody else was going to be around. And then he ended up going up on his roof and ended up, we know the story, what happens. And,
Right.
and that he sends his neighbor's husband back to the battlefield with instructions to go to the front of the line to get killed and all this other stuff. Yet the,
Yet.
the yet the saving part of the story is that God had the grace enough to say, David, you are a man after my own heart, regardless of what you've done in the past. So
And
what?
and that comes through how? Confession,
Yes.
repentance, right?
And, and what does that mean for us? It means no matter what we've done in this life, no matter how bad we think we've
Yeah,
messed up,
yeah.
no
That's
matter what we've done, it only takes that simple turn. Just like I've shared a couple episodes ago about how when Jesus was crucified on the cross, he had the two criminals on the other side, and one of the criminals said, "Jesus, if it truly is you, why don't you take the three of us down off the cross and save us, and we'll go back to normal life?" And the other criminal was like, "What are you talking about? Like
we
this
deserve
guy,
to be here.
we deserve to be here. This guy does not." And he,
Right.
he looked at Jesus and said, Jesus, when we pass from this life, remember me. And Jesus said, you will be with me in paradise. This guy didn't have
Right.
a church encounter, didn't have what we
Well,
know in the Wesleyan Church as entire sanctification. He didn't have catechism. He didn't have whatever.
no.
He just had the complete understanding of the stories and of the journey that he'd been on up to that point. And he realized, I've messed up. I need to do something. I need to confess. And he said, Jesus, I want to be with you. And it was simple as that. And so, folks, doesn't matter what you've done to this point of your life. If you confess your heart to Jesus, you will be saved. So
Yeah.
let's just go to the last part of our time together. I know our time is coming short, but if there was a key takeaway from your life up to this point, Jake, what would you like to share? If people tune into this episode, they don't hear anything else, but they tune in from here on, what would that one thing that you'd like to leave with the listeners be?
Well, I've been making a bit of reference to it already, Simon, and that is that the reality of the journey of faith is has its ups and downs. And we can, and some get discouraged and they blame God. And that's okay, so that's the one side. I'm concerned for those who go down that
Right.
road and say, and have this expectation that it's going to be this perfect life. No. In fact, Jesus says, in this life you will have troubles, but I have overcome the world. And, it is, as Jesus also says, what is the most important thing? You can have all the things of this world, but lose your soul. But, and who is the one that can save your soul? Jesus.
Yes.
And so it is, in fact, you can, and there are so many examples in history of people who have lost their lives for Jesus. They are martyrs. And in this Western culture, that just seems like, we don't understand it.
Yes.
Our spiritual struggles are different than what may be in Africa or the Middle East or Asia. And I've lived in Asia. I lived in China for a little bit, so I have some sense of that, what goes on there. But my encouragement is to recognize that Jesus is with you through those trials and struggles. And that's what James was talking to. And that we are called to not lose heart, but just hang on to Jesus. And even when it gets really hard. And there was a guy in our group today earlier that's got some financial issues and he's looking for a job and struggling, and that we can pray with him and lift him up to God. And God, we're asking for God to provide. And God, we trust in God to provide and to work through these things that are going on in his life. We trust in God. And that's the encouragement, even or especially when times get tough. Yes, that's the biggest deal.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for sharing that insight on what you've felt up to this point in your journey. And once again, thank you so much for sitting down with us here at the Journey of Faith and sharing
Thanks for the
your
opportunity,
story.
Simon.
And yeah, I'm really glad that we had the chance to do this. And thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your encouragement. And even the struggles that you had earlier in life of
Mm,
searching for who Jesus really was in your life,
that's right.
and that at the most opportune time, even when you weren't expecting it, Jesus showed up
Yeah.
and carried you the rest of the way. So Jake, thank you so much for sitting down with us here at the Journey of Faith. And folks, that does it for another exciting episode of the Journey of Faith podcast. And look forward to seeing you on the next side of things. So for now, God bless and take care, everyone. Bye bye for now.